a cavalcade of writers who dazzle with their wit, a mighty throng of seamen, awash with God and grit, the poets and the artists who venerate these shores, the tourists in their flip-flops, track sand into the stores, disciples of St. Peter, who worship by the sea, the wise Sicilian nonnas, reciting rosary, descendants of the English, the Finns and Portuguese, who greet each other daily and coexist in peace, the wealthy in their mansions, along a scenic drive, the minimum wage workers who struggle to survive, and don't forget the first ones, to walk these storied hills. Their whispers linger in the wind, their drumbeats echo still.
Once again, we have another adventure of the Gloucester Bookies. And I'm happy to say with me today, from the far left, is Professor Raymond Hildenan, all the way from Lanesville.
Yeah.
And midway on the island here, Laura Ventimiglia, who nonetheless has recently returned from fair Italy. So I must say that's a pleasure. We'll hear more about Italy, the Italians, and Italian literature shortly. And I'm here just from Riverdale. Wayne Soini. Good to see you all. And what I'd like to start with is mentioning that to the extent we can, we're going to talk about Italian literature or relations of Italians to books and Italians in Cape Ann. And that ethnic is our day. So it's like the Italian hour. So get your friends to come around the TV and see that.
Grab a glass of wine.
That's it. All right.
Right.
And first, in honor of that, please, Laura, if you'd commence.
Okay. Well, I will start with the Italians, but Wayne often gives us a theme. So the theme for this show, which sometimes we follow, sometimes we don't, the theme for this show was ethnic authors. So I interpreted that for myself as local ethnic authors writing about the ethnicity within the community, their ethnicity within the community. So I did come with, some Italians.
Which you've done.
I have.
Which you've done.
Yes. But I wasn't going to say that. So
that's too modest. There is. That's what it is.
So, but I did come prepared with 3 local authors that have written about their Italian Sicilian experiences here in Gloucester. But Italians aren't the only ones who live here. And there's been some attention to the Finnish community in authors. Susie Natty did a phenomenal job, right? Yep. And you're always talking, Ray, about. So I did want to give some attention. Pay some attention to some of the other local authors that may not have written a published book, but have started to write. Okay, so first off, let me start with some.
I should just introduce that subject to mention you. She's modest, and I have to tell you, she's the one who supervised, created, founded, and dealt with the project of stories being gathered
for the 400th,
right?
400,
for the 400th anniversary. She won't say it unless I do. And this is the reason that she can tell you there are people out there, you can verify, people out there who haven't written a book yet, haven't published a book, and yet have stories to tell and can tell them well. And they're in a book now, Our People, Our Stories,
right.
which is a great souvenir of the event.
Of the
But
400.
proceed, please.
Okay, so I'll come back to this, but I wanted to start with a local author by the name of Mia Millefolier. She goes by Mia. And she has a book coming out in the spring that's about her ancestry, her ancestors, their arrival in Gloucester, the experiences, and it's very poetically written. So it's right now going through the process of being edited and published through UMass Press. So I want to give a shout out. Everybody keep your eyes out. I don't know what the title is. But what she's currently working on is a period of time during World War II when the Italians were considered enemy aliens. And, in today's day, sometimes this topic is very apropos too, unfortunately, but the name of her project is branded Enemy Aliens in Gloucester, Mass. And what she's doing is collecting stories of people who experienced being registered as an enemy alien during World War II. So, for example, my husband's family, his great-grandparents were enemy aliens. These are people who hadn't become naturalized citizens, even though their sons and daughters fought for the war, fought for America, enlisted in the Navy or the Army or whatever. And we have, for them, their alien registration card. So that as they came and went throughout the city, they had to carry that card and show it. And the story as I understand it is, they lived on the fort and they weren't able to freely leave that area all the time. So there were some restrictions. Because, so here's the thing. So during World War II, we all know about the internment of the Japanese. That also happened to Germans and to Italians. In the Midwest and on the East and the West Coast, there were large internment camps for the Italians. We didn't have a camp as such. There was a small one in Boston. There's no record of it. There's not a lot of history. There's reference to it. But in local Italian communities, they were restricted to their neighborhood. So Mia's writing a series of stories. This is her first one. And it's the print is very small. But you can get this online. And of course, did I write out the website? No, URL. No, I didn't. But if you email Wayne at William Shakespeare...
It comes at the end of each program, William Shakespeare, AWW, and so on. Yes.
Wayne will let you know. But if you're a member, if you belong to Facebook, if you go to the Down the Fort Facebook page and search that page for Branded Aliens, it will bring you to a link for this story. And this is about actually Mia's grandparents, who were considered enemy aliens at the time. Go ahead.
Not to interrupt, but it's fascinating because my mother, during World War II, worked on the docks right in Gloucester Harbor, and in order to do so, she needed an ID.
Yes.
And at first she had trouble with her birth certificate because it was from the church and not from City Hall.
Yeah.
But she was able to get it.
Yeah.
And she told me, she said there were many people who were more American than I who couldn't get because they just didn't have the documentation.
Right.
But they were here illegally, she said.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Isn't it? And this impacted a lot, not just the Italian community, but within the Italian community, the fishing community.
Yes.
Because if you were a registered enemy alien, you could not fish. You could not work on a fishing boat. You could not work on the docks if you were an Italian enemy alien. And what also happened, somewhat separately than that, I think there were about 30 fishing boats that Mia has found that were taken over by the government to use as reconfigured as warship. So that was a huge impact on the Italian community.
I must say the impact was much greater on the Italian community than the Finnish community, but there was an impact in the Finnish community wherever there was what you're talking about, either working on the docks or around. Yeah. In my case, my grandfather was working for the Cape Ann Pool Company,
Oh,
which was in fact a defense industry.
Yeah.
And he was he'd been in this country for 40 years. But Finland, back in the old country, with no other defense against Russia, had made itself a co-belligerent. They fought Russia alongside Germany.
Oh.
So suddenly, Finland, which was fighting for its life against Russia, was allied, not quite allied, co-belligerent they called it, with Germany, was viewed now as essentially anyone in this country from Finland was an enemy alien.
Yes.
And he couldn't have kept his job of 40 years also with the Cape Ann Pool Company unless he became a citizen. So my grandfather, at that time about 50 years old, had to not learn English. You study for the citizenship exam and what the Constitution means and all.
Yeah.
He's in his 50s trying to learn that stuff so he can go to the immigration people in Boston and pass the citizenship test. And I have to sympathize and empathize with him that he was in that situation until he got his citizenship and he swore in as a member of our American country back in 1942.
Yeah.
When the chips were down.
Right.
He was there.
Right.
So really,
and they couldn't have radios and it certainly it didn't just impact the Italians. But I know that you like us sometimes to read excerpts, and I'm not necessarily
happily
prepared, but let me just read something.
You can read
let me
that
find
print?
It. I like it. You know what Wayne does when he does a book event? I really like this. He says to somebody, takes the book and he says, give me a number, any number.
Yep.
And you say 123. And he turns to page 133 and you just read.
That's a wonderful thing.
Anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn to page 2 and I'm going to read. So with the outbreak of World War II, Italian Americans like my grandfather were labeled enemy aliens and forbidden to travel by air, sea, or rail. They now belong to neither country. My grandfathers were embedded in Gloucester's fishing community, a workforce of 450 men laboring on over 30 large draggers and many smaller boats. Many fishing vessels were requisitioned for war duty, used as patrol boats and minesweepers. One of those vessels was the 85-foot dragger Jenny and Lucia, captained by Giuseppe Brancaleone. So, she's looking at this story is about her grandparents, but she's linked it to others in the community and the bigger thing. So if you're interested, if you know somebody in your family, of course, probably a generation back. So now we're talking about if you've got an older aunt or grandparents or whatever, and you have stories about enemy aliens in Gloucester, particularly the Sicilian community. This is, and I'm going to leave it for Tom, and Tom, I'm going to ask you to slip it in like in the back of before the credits and stuff so it can run across the screen. But this is how you can participate. So the title of the project is branded Enemy Aliens in Gloucester, Mass. By Mia Millefolier. And to participate in that or to get more information, you can email her at mmillef@hotmail.com. And that information will be available at the end too. But it's just kind of like, I think it's exciting work.
It's wonderful. It's exciting and it's open. It's happening.
Right.
And you're lucky you have such a great advocate in you and to appearing on the show here.
Oh, aren't you sweet?
I just want to add on behalf of teachers everywhere, and they come back to me and tell me, so I picked this up as a tip for people out there who have young kids or kids in school. You can still be in high school. You can be in middle school. Encourage the kids specifically to interview once at least.
Yes.
Interview their grandparents, either one, whoever is, grandmother, grandfather, whoever is, and interview them on their lives.
Right.
And within a few minutes, they will be enchanted and amazed at that different country that the past was, that the grandparent grew up in.
Yes.
And they'll be learning things that they otherwise would never encounter because nobody tells them, nobody suggests that they should interview their grandparents.
Right.
So do that, and that's just an example, a little offshoot of the same thing. If you interview certain grandparents, they'll come up with war
You might hear
stories
some
and how they
stories.
dealt with the hostility or suspicion
Right.
of the American government at one time. And they had to deal with it, and they did deal with it, and what they did. But who would ask? I mean, you have to ask. It's not the kind of thing they come out with and talk about on Easter Sunday.
I know, it's not dinner table conversation typically, although it depends on whose table you're sitting at, I suppose. Okay, so thank you, Mia. Now, the next one is Antonetta Calabrese. And everybody knows Antonetta. This is her picture. She's, where's the camera? It's very small, so I don't know if you'd be able to see it. She's most famously known as one of the generous gardeners on the boulevard. Yes. So she lives right on the boulevard, someplace along there. But you can see her in all kinds of weather. And she's, people start, you know who she is?
Yes,
yeah,
this is amazing.
Yeah. You know. Yeah. You don't know her name probably, but you saw her.
Oh, but you know who I mean, right? When
That's
you
her,
look at
yes.
her, yes.
And I just thanked her for doing a wonderful job, and she was so delighted.
Yeah, yeah. I saw you out here talking when I came into the women on the corner doing the same. Right, right. So Antonetta, she came from Sicily, and, when because I'm old. You think of the old country. I think of my ancestors back in the mid-1850s and what life was like, or the mid-1800s, what life was like then, and going back later or earlier or whatever. Some of the poverty, though, that existed in Italy continued to exist, in those days, continued to exist for a very long time after World War II. And even in Sicily into the 1950s and 1960s. And Antonetta lived during that period in the 1960s in Sicily. Now, she happened to come, the name of her book is Journey to America. And so just a little backstory. She had begun to write her memoir just because she had such a varied and interesting life. And she has children and grandchildren and wanted to leave some information with them. And then the Gloucester 400 Stories Project. So she talked to David Cox, who owns the antique store on Main Street. I'm still there. I know that he's not able to be there as much, but she talked to him. He put her in touch with me, and this would be a great story for the Stories Project. And of course, immediately I said, "Oh yeah, that's awesome." Except it was like 60 pages long. So,
a book by itself.
Yes, exactly. So what? And I moved from being Stories Project Manager to Executive Director for a while. So in that shift, we hired Terry Weber, who's been on the show when we were talking about the 400 Stories Project. So what we agreed, the two of us worked with Antonetta, and we agreed to an excerpt for the Stories Project, and then Terry worked with her while Antonetta continued to finish her book, her story, her life story, found an editor, hooked her up with an editor, and then lo and behold, she ended up publishing this. And really, she's an amazing woman, but the opportunity presented itself to do this through the 400 Stories Project.
A wonderful example of ripples of a wonderful event.
Yes.
And in this case, this book, I don't know if it's available in the library. But there must be a way to get this on Amazon, or is it at somewhere? How do you get it? So that's
an interesting question. I would imagine the library has it, but I'm going to check.
Okay.
Antonetta sells it herself. I believe it was available at the bookstore. I'm sure if people were interested, they could get it there.
Bookstore always is happy to order those. Yes.
Right. She printed it herself to have it available.
Good.
And this one is in English. But in the 400 Stories book, and in a separate book, she translated into her Italian, her native Italian language. Let me see. Oh, and this is also what I wanted to mention too. All of the proceeds for this go to Generous Gardeners. So look at that. But here's the thing.
Hold it up too.
Hold it up. Yes,
there's
please
a beautiful
do that.
picture there on the cover. I think
I think that was when they arrived in New York.
Okay.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I think that was when. So without giving the story away, here's what happened. She's in Sicily. I think she was 13. I read bits of it again last night to try to remember. I think she was 13. There was a terrible earthquake. Everybody, and when I say a terrible earthquake, it wasn't like they were living in modern homes. They had just finished their house. It was still not, like a house that we would think of in the 1960s here. Anyway, everybody ran to the closest big open field, and they lived there for a week in that open field. Oh. And her family had a relative in New York, and they had enough money to send for one family to come to the United States. So it went to the oldest, like the oldest of her parents. Let's say it was, I don't know if it was her father or mother's family, but let's say it was her mother's. So it went to the oldest in the mother's family, and that person said, thank you very much, but no thanks. So it went to the next one. So it kept going down the parents' generation. They wanted to stay
in Sicily.
Except for Antonetta's parents. And so that's how she got to America.
Yeah.
They took the tickets, they came, the family lived in New York, the relatives took great care of her. The reason I think this is a nice book by a local ethnic author about her ethnic experience is that she does talk about her life. Most of it is about her life in Sicily and then when she arrived in New York and so forth. But let me just read a little bit about the earthquake.
Yes.
The houses seemed to be crumbling alongside us as we ran. We could hear the fear in the dogs' panicked barking and the horses as they stamped their hooves on the ground. The only light we had was the moon shining over the white snow. Now, who knew there was snow? But they do get snow. When we reached the open field, we joined hundreds of other emotional townspeople. My dad cleaned some snow off a small ledge in the field, and my sisters and I sat snuggling together with our blankets trying to keep warm. Now, what she says up above is they went running out in their thin nightgowns carrying light blankets. So that's a little bit of the earthquake experience. Now here, in 2009, she does a beautiful job making connecting the pieces of her life. In 2009, the birth of my granddaughter, Sienna, in Gloucester, Mass., would be the driving influence to change my life as I always knew it. When she was born on a snowy day in January, I knew that going back to living a life in New York would not be the future I had always imagined. While visiting my daughter, my husband Angelo and I immediately fell in love with more than just Sienna. We loved that Gloucester shared our culture and offered a coastal life to which my husband had always dreamed of retiring. And that's what brought them to Gloucester, is how much Gloucester represented for them their home, their home
I've
country.
Heard that so many times.
So this is Antoinetta.
Beautiful.
Okay?
A contribution and a half.
All
Wonderful.
right. Can I keep going?
You can.
Okay.
Keep going.
So I just read this, and this was, for me, a page turner. Memoirs of a Gloucester Fisherman, written by R. Salvi Testaverde, who has since passed on.
Yeah.
His granddaughter is Nina Testaverde Goodek, who was also involved in the Gloucester 400. She's a board member of the Cape Air Museum. She's an artist. She has an art studio in her home. Brilliant, just a brilliant, generous, gracious woman. And I happened to see her downtown Cafe Sicilia, and she mentioned this book. So I immediately called the bookstore. What Owen said at the bookstore is that this is within the nautical books available by local authors.
Yes.
This is the bestseller. This is the
I just
bestseller.
saw it.
All right.
It's
Did you
amazing.
see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I thought it was, and I recognize the name. I know the name. I know some of his family. Yeah.
But it's,
this is the fisherman who was also a captain or not?
He was a captain.
Captain.
Yeah.
So he's talking about his voyages out on, George's Banks?
All over, because he fished out of Boston, he fished out of Gloucester, he fished where he went down to the southern states in some years and some months to fish. But it talks a lot about being a fisherman, raising a family, the sacrifices of his wife that he very often didn't even know about he had, I think he had 5. He had, I think it was all sons he had, but he writes about bringing them on. 4 of them, I believe, continued in the fishing industry, and 1 insisted on going to college, worked his way, worked summers on the boats, went to college, and became a PhD scientist, and has been in Africa doing work, back here, so forth and so on. And his story is in.
All right.
Right, I don't think I marked it. Did I mark it? No, I didn't mark it, but actually,
in any case, our people, our stories. Okay.
Yeah, okay, so let me just...
There's an overlap there.
There is, because actually, I'm just thinking about this. In Our People, Our Stories, Mia has several stories.
Yeah.
One about her aunt who worked in the fish plants. Antonetta has the excerpt from her book. And there's a story about Salvi Testaverde's son, Salvatore. So yeah, there is a lot of overlap. Okay, enough about the Italians. Well, never enough for me about the Italians, but enough about the Italians.
This?
Sure.
Is there any talk or discussion or perhaps the influence of the quota system now, how this is destroying a lot of the...
Yeah, no, I don't think so, because this was written...
It's earlier.
Earlier, yeah. So, well, it was copyrighted in 2004. So that's like 20 what?
Right. No, it wouldn't have taken effect.
Right. I don't think so. But they did talk about. The other thing is Salvi also was a poet, so he's got some poetry in here too. Yeah. Yeah. But he does talk. He talks a lot about the community of fishermen.
And there was a blurb on the books in the bookstore that underneath that mentioned he was also a poet.
Yes, yes. Oh, because this is Poetry Month.
Okay.
Yes, that's why.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So thank you very much for listening to all that about the Italians.
Oh, you're wonderful.
All right. So now in Our People, Our Stories, there is a young Brazilian woman, who wrote about her experience coming to this country and working here in Gloucester. And the title is I Wasn't Hungry Anymore. She actually came not speaking English, worked at the Gloucester House, and Mike Linquata was the one who actually kept her employed, kept her fed, and helped her learn English and move on. And I will totally not pronounce her name right. Her first name, Huila, that's not right. It's not pronounced the way it sounds. Her name is Cristina Ventura. Her middle name is Cristina, her last name is Ventura. And I should have checked how to pronounce her name. But this is someone from the Brazilian community. And what we found during the 400th is the Brazilian community is becoming quite active among themselves in trying to preserve their heritage as well, their stories. Okay. Now, this is the Wampanoag. This is a story.
I think they're having a powwow.
I know, really. What is it? You wonder if
someone working outside.
Somebody's working outside on
this
building.
It's a powwow.
The powwow.
Wampanoag. Okay.
The powwow to go with. All right. So this is a story about the Wampanoag and the descendants of Massasoit. And while this isn't a current story, it is a story about people, Native Americans who lived along the coast of Massachusetts.
Right.
Partly in Gloucester and Ipswich.
Right. All right. Illustrated as well.
Yes. Actually, let me see who wrote this. There were several people who wrote it, but so isn't that a beautiful picture?
Oh, look at that.
And then there's an illustration here. Let me see. Here's an illustration.
Yeah.
Isn't that incredible?
Nice one.
And did you tell us where you can get this book?
The bookstore. And I'm sure the library has them.
It does.
Because here's the cool thing.
Yeah.
The 400 plus, this is the 400 plus official commemorative book. But the library has absorbed the Stories Project, and they're linked to its timeline, its interactive timeline. So when the library opens, it's going to have its a local history room. And you've had people from the library on here, right?
We have, happily, yes. But mentioning Native Americans in the indigenous people, we have the good luck in Gloucester of knowing where the tribes largely located at the time of European contact, because these characters that came over from England and France into La Beauport, into here, took the trouble to write out a map, a sketch to show. It's I don't even know if well, it's some. I don't know if that even shows it. Well, that looks like they're in Eastern Point.
Yes.
But nonetheless, and then there may have been some there too.
There were.
No, there were. There's some, if I knew what it was, there is a piece of this that shows them. Was it this?
But my point for folks out there who wonder, when you're going along Washington Street, just past the Annisquam, the old Annisquam Bridge, in that area, Lobster Cove is on the left when you're going down Washington Street. Or if you take the turn and go through Annisquam, Lobster Cove is on your on your left as well, because you turned around. But the Lobster Cove area was in the center of the folks that were living on both sides of Lobster Cove. And it was believed at the time, and still there's some legends about it, that there was a spring water in that area. So they had fresh water, and they could also go down to get clams, mussels, lobsters in Lobster Cove for the tribe at any time. It was a very good place for living simply in that time period. So the both sides. And one proof of it, in about 1900, Harvard sent an expedition of archaeologists to dig up what they could in Annisquam, around the area of Lobster Cove. And they discovered uniquely, I don't think there's any other remaining sculpture of any size from the indigenous, except this in Gloucester. There's about a palm-sized sculpture in black rock, granite, but it's kind of black, carved of a woman with a sort of pointed cap and papoose, the babies on the back. Is a little.
Really?
Somebody took the time in stone to carve this. It's now it's at the Harvard Museum.
Wow.
And occasionally, if you look through images or something, PPN, indigenous images or something online, you can also get up the picture and photograph to see it. Wow. So I'm just saying, in this story, however it might be phrased, there's always more to look at and think of, and Poles Hill is supposed to be part of the culture. But believe me, Lobster Cove is really...
And isn't it a similar story? I'm not that up to date on it, but where the KPM Museum now is located at the Rotary, that was once a tidal estuary going into that land, and there are traces of Indian settlements there.
To tell the truth, remember, these people had the chance to come and go. They might live in Maine some part of the year and come down here for the summer. And
our first summer borders.
Wherever they chose to. They say, well, let's not go there. We've gone there for 100 years. Yeah. Let's go some other place. And they go next to what it was. Of course they would. Okay.
All right. So just again.
So you're wrapping it up.
I'm wrapping it up. I do want to just mention, I mentioned this the last time when we had Terry on. I don't know if that show ever aired, but this is Ode to Mia Mama. And it's written by Anna O'Connor about her mother, Rosaria Serena Barbara.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And it's a different story because it's not about fishing. So I just thought that I would mention that. And because there's several other...
The Boulevard has that statue of that. They also serve who stand and wait. Isn't that the fisherman's wife with the children?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So then there's also in here a story about the Irish at the fort.
Oh, yeah.
And there's stories in there that represent somebody from Ping Verga from China, and then of course Edward de Cahota, who from China, who was here, and his great-grandson actually wrote a play about him, who was writing a play about him at the time of we were doing the 400th, and somehow Terry connected with him. There's stories in here about Nova Scotians, Greeks, Denmark, Portuguese. So there's lots of ethnic stories in this book that's really only the tip of the iceberg, as the saying goes, about the diversity.
If anybody, I can recommend this, having read this compendium. Anybody wants to say, I wonder, we know we're a melting pot as a nation, and Gloucester obviously has had the Italians and Finns and very. I wonder if there's some book that I can get the flavor and the idea of the whole stew, and you can. And that's the book.
That's nicely put.
Sure.
Nicely put, right. Okay.
Let's Raymond, what do you
Yes. Well, this is wonderful because I was a little concerned that I had taken too big a leap into my topic, but it definitely leads in. I wrote down some notes of what you had said. Branded enemy aliens. And then Wayne, you mentioned about sacrifices for the family, the parents, and the grandparents. And so I'm going to use those segue into race as an ethnicity, and I'm going to talk about two very moving books about being American in a black body and aliens in America, even though they and their ancestors were born here for many generations. And the difference between emigration with an E and emigration with an I, and how these people were, of course, brought here under forced conditions. And then that's all I'm going to say about that.
Okay.
But two beautifully written books. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and Me, which has won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. And he, the author, has won, he's a correspondent for the Atlantic Monthly. He's won many awards for his journalism. And it's the parallel between this book, written shortly after the Ferguson riots in 2015, with James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time. And it's amazing to see nearly, I'll say 75 years ago, what James Baldwin wrote about in many of his books, not just The Fire Next Time, but that being black in America, living in a black body, has created its own culture, obviously, but its own pain. And if you read these two books or anything by these two authors, I believe you will be changed. They are beautifully written. But what's interesting is they are both letters. In this case, Ta-Nehisi Coates is writing to his son after I believe it's the Ferguson riots, and his son is distraught to see black boys, being killed for what many people think is just for being black, and being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And the pain that he felt, Mr. Coates felt, at not being able to comfort his son. There was nothing he could say. And so the letter is an attempt to explain why he could not comfort him. His parents and his grandparents said, the only way you can succeed in this country, which is killing us, and specifically growing up in Harlem and Baltimore and Prince George's County, with the largest percentage of black people living in this county, you would think they could feel safe there. No. Wow. So he felt growing up that his parents could not allow him to be black. First, they had to make him safe, and they would punish him. And this was common in the black families. Punish him if he was the slightest bit disrespectful, the slightest bit about walking on the wrong side of the street, he'd be punished. Not associating with gangs, which he really didn't, but he couldn't help growing up in this community, he was punished for that. And he made this conscious decision when his boy was born. I'm not going to teach my boy that. I'm not going to repeat this. And then he regrets it because he cannot comfort his son because his son doesn't know that he, the father, has already experienced what this boy is seeing for the first time. Both books, now James Baldwin, we talked about aliens in America. Yeah. He felt alien. He left.
You say this is a book about letters?
Two letters. One is to his son, describing what it's like to be black in America, and the second is why he left America. But they're both letters. And
they're both written in the form of letters.
Yes. So, yeah. And this, the same, so there's the connection. He actually says that 100 years ago, well, both of them said, more than 100, they quote the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, what is it meant for us? And he even quotes, because he and his family, Ta-Nehisi Coates, they were well educated. I believe out of 5 or 6 siblings, all but one went to school and graduate school and have successful careers. So, and yet, how did they succeed? What sort of blackness did they have to give up in order to become successful? And the last chapter, or the last letter in this book, is about her dear friend Mabel, who thought that she rose above this by giving up her blackness. She was a successful entrepreneur. She became very wealthy. She moved in the highest circles of society in Baltimore. So she thought she had won. But her son, who was called the Prince in the family, who became a friend of Ta-Nehisi Coates at Howard University, he was killed for being black in the wrong place. And also, Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about this in the Atlantic Monthly and won awards for that article because she showed that this particular policeman from Prince George's County followed this man because he had seen him, he thought he had seen him doing something which he disapproved of as a policeman. He followed him into Virginia, where he has no authority as a policeman, claimed that he saw him committing a robbery, which was false, and shot him. And he was cleared by the grand jury. I'll just read a couple, because I think they explain much better than I can. So he actually is talking to his nephew.
This is from James
Baldwin's book, yes. He's telling his brother, his brother's son, things about his father and the grandfather, whom this boy does not know. And I know what the world has done to my brother and how narrowly he has survived it by his religion. And I know, which is much worse, that this is the crime of which I accuse my country and my countrymen, and for which neither I nor time nor history will ever forget them, that they, unnamed Americans, have destroyed and are destroying hundreds of thousands of lives and do not know it, perhaps because they do not wish to know it. One can indeed, one must strive to become tough and philosophical concerning destruction and death. For that is what has kept mankind alive since we have heard of man. I just thought that was, you see, his nephew never knew his father or his grandfather. You were born here. You were born here and faced the future that you faced because you were black and for no other reason. So I said, you know, this was an influential book. It won awards. James Baldwin emigrated with an E to France, where he became a literary lion. One of his famous books, Giovanni's Room, in another country, both of which had been banned, became a big for the ethnic. It was a bestseller in Italy,
Yeah.
even though condemned by the church. So I wanted to mention that
Sure,
the success
sure.
in Italy.
And what was the name of that?
Another
Giovanni's
Country
Room?
in Giovanni's Room. They deal also with this, not in this case, although the black body, but the black body also can sometimes not just suffer from being black, but suffer from being a woman, a female, suffer from being LGBTQ, subject for being, his phrase, being punished because I went to school and I'm thought of being a literary person and I've forsaken the roots of what it means to being black. So I find it fascinating that he could not comfort his son, who had seen on live TV, saw these black people being shot by the police. I see you have a
No,
question.
I am thinking, you've gotten 2 books here that could be revolutionary personally, in other words, one-on-one. The wonderful thing about it's just you and a book and you, and you're able to go somewhere where you haven't been before and pass through some limits or boundaries that previously had restricted you, and you're liberated by what you're reading. So that's an invitation you're giving. To 2 books that are, I'm sure, available at Sawyer Free Library.
Oh, absolutely.
For free.
In fact, I could
Another
not
one of
get
these.
one of them because they're on hold.
Yeah. That's wonderful to hear.
I want to hear. Thank you for mentioning that. I actually, and I apologize to the library. I had to take out the teen. It's on the teen shelf. I said, "Is it okay for me to take this?" Because the adult, but it's the exact same. And I thought, well, this country is coming somewhere. Here's a book that is banned in South Carolina. And
Hold on, this book is banned in South Carolina?
I think it's been lifted, but was.
Okay.
And his latest book, The Misery, now is banned in South Carolina. And this, and this is what we're talking about in daily conversations, books being banned.
Right.
Thank goodness teens in our library can read this. And it also talks about this book, this one, is 7th on the list, perhaps some of you have recently seen this, of the 10 outstanding books of the 21st century. It's number 7.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Hey, Raymond, you brought us a prize as usual. Let me just get into something that we have touched on, which is Italian writers. And believe it or not, although this book is by Shakespeare, I like to show when I have something by Shakespeare because he's one of my favorites, as my email would show, right? William Shakespeare.
Yes.
But Shakespeare's book, The Two Noble Kinsmen, you say, what a wonderful thing that he should think of 2 noble kinsmen and what kind of intrigue and issues would develop in a play like that. No, he stole that from Boccaccio. Boccaccio, the great Italian author. Boccaccio wrote a thing. I think it's called the Theseid. Thesied. Theseid. About Theseus, Duke Theseus, an imaginary character, or historical, imaginary, legendary character. And Boccaccio wrote this not once, but about 10 times because he kept at it. The manuscript that he wrote, remember in those days it was handwritten, there was no printing press and all. He did the handwritten and long thing. Finally got the manuscript. He liked it, but it was it could be rewritten. And writing is rewriting. So he goes into this and says, no, so he does it again and he does it again. Over 10 years, finally his opus, the project of his lifetime, 10 years later, 10 years in the making, he comes out with this final version of this story of the 2 knights and how they interacted, and eventually it led to a huge tournament between hundreds of knights, and then after the tournament was over, who wins and who loses, which is that usual thing see in cartoons and everything, the 2 guys fighting for the love of a woman. You see that all the time as a theme. Boccaccio invented that thing where 2 guys are going to fight over who the woman would love, and indeed at the end, Well, I'm not going to spoil it by telling you the ending.
May I,
But,
please because you're my savior today,
Right.
please repeat the title for me.
yeah.
The title of the Shakespeare play is Two Noble Kinsmen.
Okay, because I get that confused, and I'm sure you're going to scoff at me, but with
Two Gentlemen
of Verona, are there,
There's
are there
two different
similarities?
ones.
Would you
Two
say?
Gentlemen, no real similarities.
Okay,
There's
but
kind of
Italian, Verona.
Verona,
Yeah.
of course, being Italian.
I
So you
confuse those two
yeah.
titles.
This takes place in essentially Athens, Greece. The Two Noble Kinsmen. But
Yes.
anyway, so then you say, well, Boccaccio started something that rippled right quickly to Shakespeare. No. Before that, Geoffrey Chaucer,
Yes.
who's really often thought of as the father of English literature, Geoffrey Chaucer, what do you think? He picked up Boccaccio, and he says, that makes a wonderful story. Let me write
Was
it.
he a diplomat in Italy?
He was a diplomat in Italy, too. Yes, he was. And so Chaucer picked up Boccaccio, and he says, I'm going to do this. He called it, amongst the Canterbury Tales, he wrote the Knight's Tale. So it went from Boccaccio, after 10 years, the wonderful Boccaccio, and then to Chaucer as the Knight's Tale, as part of that anthology, the Canterbury Tales. And then lastly, picked up by, geez, this is a good story. I think I should make a play with it, by Shakespeare,
Yep.
Two Noble Kinsmen. And why I go through that is I'm at a point where I just, you read the Shakespeare and you say, I wonder if there's more to it that I can find out or discern or have some insight in if I look back to the originals and the originals. And by the way, Two Noble Kinsmen, that's in the library.
Of course.
Canterbury Tales, that's in the library.
We're going to make sure this is
As
in the
soon as you go to Boccaccio,
we're going to make
yes,
it's
not
not in the
Boccaccio's not in the
library.
Yes, he is.
Well,
Is he?
the-
So
the-
I'm
Right.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh.
Boccaccio at large in a number of things.
Yeah.
But if you want to read the Theseid, which is not so popular,
No.
if you either have to be
You're right.
Laura and read it in Italian, which you can get on Amazon in Italian,
Yeah.
or you have to go to the online, like Google,
Oh, yeah.
and say Boccaccio Theseid in English or English translation, and then it'll pop up something that you can read online, which I did. And it's really wonderful to read because, remember, I've already read the Two Noble Kinsmen, I already read the Knight's Tale, but now I'm getting into the original and seeing how different that is, and I'm recognizing differences between Boccaccio's focus and things rather than Shakespeare's or Chaucer's.
Yeah.
And I mean, these are both Chaucer and Shakespeare,
Yes.
giants of literature. And they have to be at the knees of Boccaccio.
And wasn't
Yeah.
Chaucer's
Italian.
structure in the Canterbury Tales, he took inspiration from Boccaccio as well as other Italians, but in particular from the structure of exchanging stories. In Boccaccio, they exchange stories. They're not on a pilgrimage, but they do exchange their stories. And Boccaccio is, speaking of our Italian heritage, was very much influenced by the Satyricon of Petronius. So you can just keep on going further and further back.
But
It's
this
not-
one was original. This
And-
Boccaccio's.
Well,
Boccaccio's,
have you read Satyricon?
No,
Okay.
I'm just explaining that I've read the scholarship that says that there's influences of the meter and the line and the way in which certain lines that relate to these people, but not the plot, not the idea, not the characters.
Okay.
These are original.
Well, good, you didn't say that at first.
because
Because I was thinking the same
So
thing.
if you want influences, there's influences of other things to Boccaccio. But if you want originality and creativity,
his use of the
where
language.
the guy is
yes.
doing let me do a totally new, original, amazing story, and that's the Boccaccio comes out with it, which then, again, is so good. It's lifted by these giants of literature, Chaucer and Shakespeare. So what is
So
it?
I just want to slip this in.
Imitation is the sincerest form of
Flattery,
flattery.
yes.
Yeah.
And
Go
the
ahead.
imitation, I just want to point out, is of Italians.
Okay.
Okay.
Good, good. All right. Now, we are going to conclude, and happily so, after all of our adventures.
What a beautiful,
in and
we've
out
covered
of
so much today.
We have.
Cape Ann and ethnicity, and last but not least, Boccaccio.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a long time since I've been able to say anything about Boccaccio. Okay, thank you, and good day to you, I guess. We'll see you next time. Thanks very much. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Tuolla Lontoossa Jennin mä kohtasin. Halo Vöki, oho. Hän on neitosten joukossa kaunihin. Halo Vöki, oho. Suukon kirsikka silmät niin mustat kuin yö. Ja ne loisti kuin tuikkiva tähti.